I understand, obviously, the way that my camera is oriented, and then you just type in that date into Wonderground. You can look up the historical weather and figure out, okay, what was the wind direction, what were the conditions, and why was that deer there? It all goes back to, like, why? Why was he doing what he was doing?
Mm-hmm. What is up, everybody? Whitetails, but not a spot to go. Or are there lots of spots to go? I feel like, guys, and I think you've seen this a lot, we've probably all seen this, you know, if you've watched, and there's nothing wrong with this style of outdoor media, but if you watch a lot of, you know, whitetail-oriented outdoor media, or even if you've just never hunted whitetails before, you might think like, oh, I need a big piece of private, or I need private access, or I need a well-managed property. Very nice to have. I know I don't have, Eric. I know you don't have, or you, Ryan. But we all seem to get by. We get by. And so that's what we're going to talk about today is how do we get by? And actually get by pretty well, I would say. So don't be fooled if you don't have, you know, a quotation mark. Yep. Great spot, because there's hope. There's lots of great spots out there. It just kind of takes a little, a little know-how, some strategy, some techniques, you know, that we've learned throughout the years. Maybe some modern technology, you know, that's at play these days. We can always use our technology, and so hunting whitetails, no spot, no problem.
And odds are, Mark, after that beautiful intro, no matter where you are, if you're listening to this or watching this right now, no matter where you are in United States.
Sure, yeah.
You likely have a spot within 30 minutes.
Even in Florida?
Could be taking advantage of that early rut opportunity right now.
You know.
I think so in Florida.
Oftentimes.
I got a Map Scout Florida, and we'll add that to the agenda after this.
Wouldn't that be neat if you could hunt key deer?
That would be neat.
Because they're just little.
Petite.
Yeah, they are.
Cute little things.
Yeah.
We're sidetracking, though. Shocking. Is everybody shocked? I know I am. When it comes to hunting, really any type of hunting, though, and I've talked about this before, particularly like growing up before like digital mapping software that just like made your life so easy. Where do you go? I mean, really, honestly, at least in the past, and we're talking not that long ago, The only way to find a spot was to go drive around, spot some obscure sign that's marked as public, which may or may not be there. Somebody may have conveniently removed it. And you're like, oh, now I've got, 1, 2, 3 spots. Now you can sit on your couch, Eric. And find spots galore. In fact, here's the problem. Too many spots.
Yep.
Good problem to have. So let's talk about finding some spots, Eric.
Yeah.
You're constantly map scouting, you're constantly, scouting on the ground. Big whitetail hunter in a variety of landscapes, so we're going to get to some of those landscapes here pretty soon. What's your spot finding square one strategy look like?
So I can even kind of back up on that a little bit. Like when I first started deer hunting, deer hunting to me was driving, air quotes, up north to hunt. Like that was always, that was growing up deer hunting, how it worked. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that.
Same.
Yeah, and I grew up in southeast Wisconsin, and when I got into high school, probably 14, 15 years old enough to hunt like on my own without like direct, adult supervision. I realized, that, hey, my parents' house was positioned right on the corner of a piece of public land, basically, right, kitty corner across the road was a piece of public. And we would always drive 5 hours up north to go hunt.
Get that greener grass.
Exactly. And one day I was, again, probably like 15 years old at this time. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to go out and hunt. I had no idea, like, to your point, where the boundaries were or anything like that. I just knew that, like, this corner, there was a public land sign, and that beyond that was stuff that I had access to, and that I figured before I got off of that, I would find a sign that told me, you are not welcome here. So I put my like Summit Climber on my back, and I walked out of the driveway, across the street, into the public parcel, and I walked for 5 hours until I finally got to a spot that I deemed worthy of my tree stand, climbed up, sat there, and then made the long haul back, home. Got home long after dark. Parents were very worried, and left my tree stand there, which is a no-no, but this is before that rule was a no-no. Next day, come to find out that I had walked across the entire property to about maybe 50 yards from a road on the north end. So that's my story about like the importance of map scouting and like how we've come a very long way.
What an adventure though for a
It
lad.
was. Yep.
Wow.
I thought I was like in the middle of just the most beautiful whitetail country in the world.
Well, you know what? Here's what I'll say with that though. Like, not all bad, and not necessarily a bad strategy for a first time. So, and here's what I do sometimes, which I guess it could pay off or could not pay off. I go into a new piece, I find something that I like, so then I set up, which is not a bad strategy, but then I end up not getting the intel that I need for like future hunts on that place. Like you kind of saw a lot of that place, and then at the end of the day, you're like, okay, now I have a better picture of like what I might want to do next time.
Exactly. And so I was 15 years old at this time.
Right.
And had no idea what I was doing when it came to hunting. And I hunted that spot like quite a bit that year. Saw a couple deer, nothing crazy. Never saw a buck from the stand that year hunting that piece. And I felt really bad for myself at the end of that season, like as I should not have. But I'm sitting there like feeling sorry for myself that I don't have a good place to hunt, air quotes, And I lost permission on a place that I had permission for, which is why I was, doing that whole thing going across the street. Next year, I was 16 years old. I hardly bow hunted. And because
that does not sound like you.
Because I didn't have a spot to hunt. Later that year, I wrote a couple letters, probably around like Halloween time, picked up a permission piece very close to the public land that that I'm talking about in this instance, got access to it, and I hunted that until, probably about 4 or 5 years ago. Great place. But anyways, the reason I bring that up is if I could go back and redo that right now, like I'm so envious of like the opportunity that I had growing up of being able to like go hunt that, but I look back on it regretfully not taking more advantage of it. Because now I sit there and I look at that same spot on the map, knowing what I know now, and I'd be like, oh, I'd go here, I'd do this, I'd do that. So that's why I bring that up. Is like no matter where you are, what your situation is for like private access or whatever, that spot I guarantee knowing and evolving and growing as a hunter, right? We're talking 15 years old, 15 years down the road now, So a lot of time has passed. A lot of experiences have happened that have helped me learn things, whatnot, that would adjust the way that I hunt. I guarantee knowing what I know now, someone could go in there and shoot a buck that they would be very, very happy with. And again, that's kind of what we hit on in the front end of this is no matter where you are, that situation probably applies to you, and there's probably people right now that are feeling sorry for themselves not having a spot, but there are areas that you can hunt no matter where you're at, and I think that's what we're kind of going to get into.
Yeah, and I think with that, and I think we're talking to a lot of people here. We're talking to people who are just getting into whitetail hunting or people that maybe have been into it for a while. I mean, I think this applies to everybody, but there's no question that, like, on, different public spots that anybody has access to, like, you can find a giant, right? Yep. I would say, and maybe I'm wrong here, but, like, you may have to, like, let's say you had a primo spot, right? And just, like, well-managed, and you've got, just, like, certain age class of deer, older age class bucks, And some I've known people that have lost spots like that, and like you said, they just kind of quit, and they're like, "Well, there's not." It's like, well, you just need to adjust your parameters.
Yep, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like you don't have everything is contextual in that regard, right? Like when a 150 was a good buck before, now a 120, it's like it's the same
Exactly.
amount of effort, same amount of pride or whatever. Like, if you're going to base things off antler size, which is how we judge everything in life. I don't know. Like, I think, but I think some people get put off. Like, well, I don't have this anymore, so it's not worth going. It's like, no, it's still amazing.
Definitely. Absolutely. And I think the big thing when it comes to finding that spot is, like we said, it's probably right under your nose. And once there's a lot of ways to find those places, like we talked about, like mapping and all that stuff. But I think what we're kind of talking about today is any habitat type, different habitat types, like farmland to bluff country, river bottom type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of different nuances that apply to those different situations. I think that covers those 3 terrain types, cover a lot of what the most of the whitetail, landscape is. But there's different, essentially, like ways to eliminate a lot of the stuff that's around you and turn 5,000 acres into 3 different 20-acre core areas that you really want to hunt.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or, conversely, finding the 5-acre piece or, small piece that has what you want on it or what you're looking for, and it might be surrounded by a bunch of good private land.
Exactly.
And that's speaking to me, because if anybody listens to this podcast, they know that I'm the world's worst whitetail hunter.
You're not the world's worst whitetail hunter. You're just eternally frustrating, Ryan. And the reason why you're here and so frustrating is you live in a damn good whitetail state.
It's true.
And bow hunting whitetails here at home is one of my most favorite things to do.
Yep.
You're a good bow shot. You own a bow.
Mark.
You have all the equipment, and you don't go. We've had interventions for me on the podcast before. That's what this should be for you.
And so what Erik just said, though, is when you look at this huge amount of property, it's 5,000 acres, and try to condense it down into a couple of small, like, core areas. I drive an hour to work every day, and I drive by sometimes 100 whitetails when I'm driving. Like, I'll see them feeding in fields and things like this. And I'm, well aware of a lot of the public area that's out there. And I fall victim to the same mentality that I also critique, what I call like public land syndrome.
Yep.
Where you see it, and then I'm automatically in my head going, somebody else is hunting there.
Yep, exactly.
Where if I would take like whitetail out of the equation and put like waterfowl, or if I would put like small game in there or turkeys, I'd be like, yeah, everybody's saying that, but nobody actually does it because it's public land syndrome. They drive by it and they're like, it's probably loaded. And like, so I get, I guess, dissuaded by the amount of land that I see. Yep. And then knowing that my general inexperience as somebody who puts effort into whitetail, scouting, sign reading, etc., I just dismiss the whole thing. And I end up driving by it. And then every year I'm sitting there, I'm like, man, I saw just an absolute toad of a buck on that totally great piece of public ground that I'm certain if I would have put a little effort.
Right. And no question you can run into guys.
Sure.
I mean, I've been shimmying up my tree in the dark, and then all of a sudden you look over and you're like, oh, that guy 80 yards away is doing the exact same thing. Right?
And it happens, right?
Right,
Right.
And it happens.
Or you get to a spot where you usually park that you usually have to yourself, and it's 6 a.m. and there's somebody already there, and now you're so I mean, like, there's no question, but
Sure.
You can catalog those things and potentially use that pressure to your advantage. We're kind of getting ahead of ourselves right now.
Yeah, but I do think I think that's a really important thing to bring up because, myself included, for many, many years, it's like I'd pull into a spot and there'd be more people there, and automatically, like, I've already determined in my head that today is going to be a waste of time. But, like, flipping that and just because someone else is hunting that same stuff doesn't really mean anything that's going to impact your success. Yeah, there's more people out there. Like you said, there's ways to use that to your advantage, but not everyone goes into the same. It's like, why not you? Like, why not you today for being the guy that's going to be pulling the biggest buck on that piece out? Perfect example that we've talked about this.
I know exactly where you're going.
A couple of years ago, I was hunting a piece in northern Illinois that was getting hammered, absolutely hammered by hunting pressure, and I was kind of like wit's end when it came to this spot. Got there super early one Saturday or Sunday. It was a weekend, when most people are out. The place was absolutely loaded. I went in there and went into a spot that I thought was good. I hadn't had like historically great sits there. I knew that it was like a decent area for a deer to come by. Didn't have any. I had a trail camera out, but I hadn't checked it. Had no idea what was on it, what was there, anything like
Just
that.
flying blind.
Flying literally, totally blind.
Yeah.
And got in there that morning and ended up shooting what I would probably guess to be the biggest, oldest deer, potentially like in the surrounding area.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that deer came back at like 11 years old.
Not wild.
So, I mean, when I shot him, he would have been born when I was a senior in high school.
And what's super crazy is he inhabited a piece of public ground that was getting absolutely slammed.
Slammed by hunting pressure, slammed by, so Illinois does a sharpshooting program.
Okay.
Where they put corn piles out to
Yep.
control CWD. So you throw those factors in there, cars, all the other things that whitetails face against them. That thing defied all odds and lived 11 years.
Yeah.
Well,
That tells me that no matter where you are, there's something out there for you.
yeah, exactly. And I think with that, Eric, if I remember correctly, it wasn't like an unknown deer.
No.
I mean, like some people knew about that deer.
It wasn't, and it was kind of a funny thing where I shot the deer, you know, put a picture out on social media, and actually, so I shot the deer. I brought my trail camera home as I was like leaving the property, and processed the deer that day. You know, put a picture on social, whatever. Maybe like 3-4 days later, I'm going through my trail camera, and I'm like, oh, there he was. Like he was there the night before.
So crazy.
And then a buddy, a friend of a friend actually reached out through, like I did not have any connection with this guy. All of a sudden, a good friend of mine says, hey, so-and-so, a friend, thinks that he was hunting that deer that you shot in Illinois. And I mean, I don't necessarily live close to this area. I was traveling quite a bit. I'm like, that's impossible. And he connected me up with him, and he sent me like years and years of trail cam pictures of
Really?
this thing.
Oh
Yeah,
my
it was like the
gosh.
coolest thing
Makes
ever.
coolest buck even cooler.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So,
Yeah.
I'm sure, like, you know, bummer for that guy,
Yeah.
right? But also, like, I mean, like, I guess one of the benefits of social media, like, at least he knows.
right.
To get some closure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, you
yeah.
get some closure. You're not like,
Yeah.
you know what? I don't have any pictures, but I'm still gonna, you know, go out next year. Like, you know, it's like, no, he gone.
Yeah, he's gone.
Yeah.
He's not coming back.
I've had the opposite of that where I shot a big whitetail and I got some bad flack.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, you did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
What happened there?
Well, you did. No. Well, same thing, just opposite.
Just
reaction.
opposite reaction. Yeah. So
not so happy that you shot the deer that they had
no,
on their camera.
no bad flack.
Yeah.
Bad flack.
This guy was a very good sport. He was awesome.
That's awesome. I'm gonna go back into some of the digital mapping thing, kind of.
Because it relates to, I think, that story that we just kind of talked about.
It does, and then I guess the one thing that I would add to it is, although generally in my experience, like archaic and clunky, hard to navigate, and cross-ref with like your different types of other mapping software, DNR websites can reveal things that aren't on. So it's good to cross-ref.
I
a
love
little
those
bit.
DNR websites. They get a lot of flack. I mean, they actually, I shouldn't even say they get a lot of flack. A lot of people just don't even know they exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I spent a year working at the Wisconsin DNR, and in that year that I was there, that was one of the things that I was like most, I guess, impressed by was the resources that people have out there at their disposal if they don't have Onyx or Spartan Forge or whatever. You know, like there's a lot of cool.
Go Hunt has some awesome mapping.
Yeah,
nowadays,
exactly,
too, you know?
exactly. But there's a lot of cool like state agency based stuff that is going to do a couple things. One, it's going to show different types of programs, which obviously all these other mapping apps kind of like showcase, but it's going to cover it with a little bit more detail, more current information. So one that I'll lean on, like specific to Wisconsin, is our forest crop land. So, you know, all those digital mapping applications, they show it, but they don't necessarily have like the most accurate, hey, today this is the status of this parcel and its involvement in the program. Whereas if you go on the DNR website, you can find not only its current status, but even like parking locations, your access route. A lot of times you'll find, I'm sure anyone that spent a lot of time like looking at digital maps, specifically with like private access that's open to public hunting, or privately owned land that's open to public hunting, you'll see these places that are like landlocked, and you're like, well, how the heck do I get in there? Your state agency does have the answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
They'll like illustrate the easement.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. And then you can just cross-ref that with whatever app you're using.
Yep.
Plan her out and get into some of that stuff.
It takes some detective work.
Yeah. Definitely.
Which to me is
That's
actually
half
part
the
of the
fun,
fun.
for sure.
It's like you're treasure hunting in a way. And we're kind of getting into story time here, but I think sometimes stories illustrate things, and we're talking about experiences. I've had a couple, like you talk about opposite experiences. One time I was trying to access a piece of land that was open to public hunting. Heck, Erik, you might have been with me. And we drive down the driveway, and we asked the gal, and she was very not receptive to us hunting that land that technically, like, we had every right to hunt and park there. It just wasn't worth our time to, rock the boat. She was obviously, like, very unsettled that we were there wanting to do that, which was disappointing. I'd say conversely, I had an opposite reaction from a gentleman where it was a piece of private ground with public access. It was, but I hadn't been in on it before, so found the guy's house, knocked on the door. Luckily, he was home, and like I just asked him a couple questions about the property. I'm like, hey, this is what I'm thinking about doing. It looks like it's this. Is that still the status? Are there any places that I'm like, I'm not seeing, because I wasn't seeing like a where to park or like necessary. And he was super cool. He goes, hey, I appreciate you asking. Not everybody does. Since you did ask, why don't you just park right down here? And all it was, like, it was just in his field there.
Yeah.
But it was probably actually better for him and me in some ways. But had I not asked, I'd been like kind of like weaving it off the highway a little bit, like, a little bit sketch. And it was so, even though you may have access to those things, which you do, it doesn't hurt to talk with the person at the same time and establish somewhat of a rapport.
For sure. Absolutely. And I think another thing kind of like building off that is, it sounds like you cultivated that relationship with that guy in season.
And it was in season, because I hadn't been to that spot before. Actually, I can't remember the circumstance, but I had abandoned my A spot, and I'd had that kind of circled, and I'm like, you know what? No better time to check it out than right now.
So I think that's something that a lot of people, it's something in the whitetail world too, that people, it's been pushed on the whitetail hunting space that you got to have your spots picked and prepped, and you got to have all this stuff done before, August, whatever. So you're out of the woods a whole month before opening day. And, while I think that definitely applies to people in a lot of different situations, like if you're hunting private land, yes, that does make sense for you in your hunting situation. But conversely, on the other side, if you don't have access to that kind of stuff, I actually think there's a whole lot of value in, your in-season stuff like you're just talking about, but also the in-season scouting. And when I say in-season scouting, you'll hear guys, and this is valid, but, wait for a rainstorm, walk in because it's going to mitigate your scent, your impact on the area. I actually don't think it's that bad of a thing for you to have an impact on the area. And even in some cases, you end up spooking a deer. You can learn a lot from spooking the biggest buck on the property. He's not gone. I promise. He's not gonna.
Right.
He's not going 10 miles away. But there's a lot that can be learned from those kinds of encounters, and that's something that, in the past it's been a mind shift for me, because historically that is kind of how I hunted. Like I wanted to have my cameras out.
It's probably one of my biggest mistakes I've made over the years, and one of my biggest regrets is being like too tender with places.
Yep.
And I'm not saying go through like a wrecking ball or anything like that.
Have a plan, hunt, treat it like a hunt, look at your maps ahead of time, figure out the areas that you want to go into. And I guess where I'm going with this is a couple of years ago, I have an example that kind of builds off this, but I went into a spot. It was middle of November. I always take the first full week of November off. I had hunted a lot, and it was down to my plan F, just was striking out everywhere. Went into a place. There was actually another guy in there parked. So I was right away discouraged by that. And I got maybe maybe a half mile from the parking lot. Kind of came off a little, CRP where it dropped down into the bottom. And I took a couple steps, and all of a sudden it was like you flushed a covey of quail. And it was just like, what happened was I spooked a doe that must have had at least 3, 4, 5 different bucks on her.
Gosh,
and it was just like, the bucks didn't know I was there. The doe knew something happened, but she didn't know what happened. It was a super high stem count area. She was clearly bedded there in the middle of the day, just kind of soaking up the sun. All those bucks, almost like, if you picture like satellite bulls on a group of cows, that's basically what these bucks were doing.
Yeah.
You had one real nice buck that was bedded with this doe, and then there were a bunch of younger bucks, and spooked her. The whole thing gets blown up. Those deer aren't worried about necessarily my presence. They're worried about finding that doe. And it was like a beehive of activity. I literally got right up in the tree. I saw, I think, 3 out of the 5 different bucks that I did spook on that sit all came within bow range, all doing the same thing, just kind of like cruising, looking for stuff. But that's an example, and it's not just a rut thing. It's not something that you can only do during the rut. In-season scouting is something that I think you need to do all the time, because I ended up killing one of those bucks on the very next day with that intel. Had I not done that, had I not spooked those deer, or on the flip side, if I would have had the mentality that, I spooked them, they're not coming back, so I'm going to write this area off, I wouldn't have been right in there the next morning to capitalize on one of those bucks coming back and scent checking that and shooting them at 15 yards.
I had a very similar situation. Maybe a lot of folks have had, but I was hunting a piece of river ground where you had to cross like a cattail marsh to get in it, and it was actually a very small piece of public that you got access to, but it has difficult access. I'd hunted a handful of times, and I always see deer there,
Yep.
And right when I got to the edge, bump a buck and a doe, and dude, it was really, really nice buck bedded with that doe. And I'm like, okay, that sucks, but I mean, it was almost like inevitable, like because of where he was, like you were just going to bump that deer on the way in. And so I'm like, well, I'm still going to set up, because historically I know that deer, travel through this piece of hard ground. And I didn't really put 2 and 2 together at the time. And I've probably talked about this instance before on the podcast, but like you said, a beehive of activity. Just because that buck and that doe left, like obviously she had left some scent in the area, because I have only had a handful of times where I've seen that many just like cruising bucks going in and out of and I think I saw 7 different bucks that night. Yeah. And most of them were small. Got a shot at, I'd say like a medium size, 2 or 3 year old, something like that. Didn't capitalize, but it was still like a really cool experience that I learned a lot from.
Yeah.
So.
And you mentioned another rut situation there, right? Rut-ish time frame. But I think another thing with the whole in-season scouting, if you do bump a deer, let's say you do, it's middle of September at the time of recording this. So, I mean, we got a month and a half before that time is here.
Right. Deer season here opens Saturday.
Yeah. Sometimes the best thing you can do is bump one, because if you bump them, well, guess what? It worked. It worked for that deer.
Yep.
He got out of there before you got close enough to get an arrow in him or whatever. So he's got confidence in that spot, and it's not something that, it's not a one and done.
That's an interesting way to look at that. Like, he's evaluating his position on the landscape and thinking like, yep, I got the drop on my predator as it was coming in on me. And you think he's more likely to be then comfortable with that particular area and just be like, cool, this is a good spot to look out for bad guys.
Yep. I think it instills like that confidence in him, and like I actually, hunting kind of more open country in the last couple of years has helped me like apply that, I guess, to whitetails.
Yeah.
Whitetails back home, at least, where it is a little bit more thick, but a lot of times you'll find, when you see deer in an area that has topography, oftentimes they're bedded, up on a hill looking down with the wind blowing over them. Whether it's mule deer, we were just in Alaska, we found blacktails behaving the same way.
Same thing.
And that's a lot of times how whitetails
one of the biggest
act
bucks.
as well.
One of the biggest bucks that we saw, we didn't get because he was bedded in the exact perfect position.
Exactly. And I think there's something to be said about like once you kind of see that, like you bump a deer, don't get upset with yourself that, oh, I bumped him, like I'm out of here. Go understand that area, figure out, like start asking yourself the questions. Why was he here? What are the conditions today? And then copy and paste that to a different, time on the calendar when you think that he's going to be there, the conditions are right. Use the stuff that you learned in spooking him that day that you did, and now apply a little bit different spin on that to get in there. And whether it's that deer or not, I mean, that's prime habitat on the landscape. Whether that deer is there or a different deer is there, that is the stuff that deer are in pockets, right? You look at a swath of timber, and let's just say a 5,000 acre chunk of big woods deer habitat. Deer aren't sporadically scattered throughout, evenly dispersed throughout that 5,000 acres. There's going to be pockets of areas where those deer are and where they're congregating. And because you bumped a deer in this case, you now have one of those identified. And that's a spot that you can hunt and apply a little bit different access route, and I think have some pretty good success.
Right. And like you said, it doesn't necessarily, I mean, it can, crops can change and things like that, or, corn can be in, corn can be out. Maybe some of those things affect the landscape, but like you said, you find that spot, you're like, oh, shoot, I bumped that deer. Like you said, maybe it was November. That deer still wanted to be there for a lot of reasons, and you could go in there opening day September, and maybe even with no intel, and go, what, I'm gonna push my chips in on that spot, and I'm gonna bank on that he's gonna be lazy and coming in late from feeding, and he's not gonna be in that bed yet, and set up on that deer and kill that deer.
Mm-hmm. Good whitetail cover, good deer cover is good deer cover. I don't care where it is, what state you're in, what habitat type you're in, thick areas where they have the stuff set that they need to their advantage, working for them, line of sight, prevailing wind direction, those being the main two. That is going to hold true in a lot of different landscapes, whether you're hunting western river bottoms or bluff country, big woods, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The same fundamentals apply.
It's almost like, and I maybe even brought this up before, but I can equate some whitetail or even general hunting stuff to fishing, actually. You look at a creek, you know what I mean? Not every spot in that creek holds the big trout.
Yeah.
The big trout's going to get the best hole with the best spot with the best advantages, right? And even if you pluck that trout out, guess who's moving in next?
Exactly.
The next biggest trout.
Exactly.
Eventually, know? So, yeah, I'm getting fired up about deer hunting, Aaron. Let's talk about kind of some of those primary, I guess, whitetail habitats that definitely not limited to. Like you said, Ryan, you brought up Florida earlier, right? That's gonna be a little bit different. You always gotta, what about this? But let's start with farm country. Yeah. A lot of whitetails live in farm country. We have a little bit of a mix in our area, I'd say, right here. But what types of things are you looking for on farm country that goes, that's kind of where I want to go, and maybe regardless of time of year, or maybe break down the time of year.
Yeah, anything except the beautiful hardwoods when it comes to farm country. I think a lot of when it comes to and I'll expand on that, I guess. When it comes to farm country, right, you've got interminglings of cropland with brushy swales that oftentimes drop down, and maybe you got a little bit of irrigation drainage or something that comes off the field, and in that it's chock full of ragweed. It's kind of woolly, nasty, and then maybe you got a beautiful little chunk of hardwoods that then transitions into that same landscape, kind of evenly distributed across the region. But when it comes to like farm type habitat, and there's a public piece that I've hunted for years that has a lot of this kind of stuff in it. A lot of folks, when they look at that area on the map, they see these big, beautiful crop fields that have many acres of corn or soybeans or alfalfa or whatever. They look at that, and then the first thing that a lot of people do is they try to figure out, okay, where's the deer coming from in the predominant bedding cover, which is a lot of times going to lead people into the hardwoods.
Mm-hmm.
This is where my head was going, by the way, because as you're saying this, I'm thinking, this piece of ground that I'm looking at right now in my head, Don, with maybe a bow the next couple of weeks, first thing I was doing is like, okay, where are the woods?
Yep.
Go on.
So that is where a lot of folks are going to go. You can have good hunts in that stuff, but where I think one of the most, and another thing with farm country is a lot of people hinge their tactics on the crop status.
Mm-hmm.
What is the crop? What is the status of it? Let's say it's a soybean field. And, okay, so what is the crop? It's soybeans. What is the status of them? Are they green and desirable, or are they yellow and dry and less desirable? And then, taking it a step further, are they in? Are they picked? Are they out entirely? All of that stuff is going to kind of impact that. The answers to those questions are going to oftentimes drive people closer to, sitting the edges of that stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of times then, we talked about those little brushy irrigation ditches that come off. You're going to have, you talked about structure too, Mark, like different, I'll use walleyes as an example. Like anyone that's fished walleyes knows that, like, a lot of times you're looking for that little break in the structure underneath. Maybe it's a log or like a big rock bar that comes off a point, some sort of change, right? Well, the biggest change when it comes to farm country is that buffer from like the whatever that crop is to the hardwoods. When a deer, I mean, let's say your goal is to shoot like one of the more mature bucks on the area, I would guess, and I mean, this is there's a lot of different ways to look at it, but I'd guess a lot of times that those bucks want to have a lot of those things that we talked about, sight, prevailing wind, working to their advantage, and a lot of times they'll find that in those brushy irrigation ditches because they can see a lot more. They know that a lot of the hunting pressure lives in the timber, and I don't want to say that you can't shoot them in the timber because you definitely can, but if I were to hunt farm country and if you said, hey, this is the situation that you have and this is where you need to go, that would be the first thing that I'm kind of keen on, is those swales, those little minute changes in the landscape that are a lot more subtle than like, oh, this big chunk of hardwoods that, yeah, it's raining acorns all over the place. Yeah, the deer are going to be there, but I think where they are going to want to be during the daylight hours and when they're moving most frequently is going to be in those little like irrigation swales and that kind of thing.
So how are you hunting that then? Like, you're probably not finding big mature trees to get up in?
Nope. So last year I killed a doe in one of these situations, a doe right before we did our Field to Fork event at Vortex. Mm-hmm. And basically my strategy there is I hunted this spot a lot. Like I started it, I hunt this spot every year. It's one of my like favorite spots to hunt. And I always like to hunt it early because it just seems like that's it sets up best for that time of year. What was unique about last year is a lot of times if I'm going to have success on that area, it's like my first or second time in because deer do end up in the crops, right? In this case, it's an alfalfa field. And deer end up in those alfalfa fields. It might be after dark, but if you're walking out through that alfalfa field, you're blowing deer off of that. So last year was unique in that I didn't shoot one the first day in there or the second day in there. So I had to all of a sudden start being super, super careful with how I was getting in and out of that spot. It's mainly getting out of it, working around deer.
Right.
Which was, different exit routes. Yeah, the easy way is going to be walk right through that field. Well, guess what? Now the spot's, nullified. It's you might as well, write that off for a little bit. If you just blew every deer off the field, they're not going to be there the next day.
That is one thing that I find the most challenging.
Yep.
Is getting in and out, particularly on a lot of these, public land spots that we're talking about that just sometimes the access does not set up. I'd say most of the time the access does not set up optimally for getting in and out. And sometimes I consider them like one and done spots.
Yeah. Yep.
So
using this piece as an example, first day I hunted it from a tree, on the edge, just kind of more or less observing it. I've actually lucked into some pretty good hunts just observing this area from a distance. One year I had a group of bucks come out across the field. They covered 300 yards in about 20 minutes and one wound up at 30 yards and I killed them on opening day. That honestly, I would put that more in the category of, right place, right time. There was a lot of bit of luck involved in there. Honestly, I think one thing that actually made those deer move a lot is the density of mosquitoes that year.
Really?
Oh,
It was, this would have been 2018.
That was a wet year.
Wet year. We had mosquitoes everywhere. I had like 3 thermocells in the tree. It was 93 degrees on opening day. All I was seeing on Instagram that day was why you shouldn't be hunting. And I went hunting and I shot a buck on public, like, and conditions that most people would say is insane. And I saw quite a few of them.
I mean, do you think those bucks were like, get me out of the
honestly,
woods?
I do. As soon as they got into the field, they were just acting super odd. They were, their tails were going a million. It's like watching a horse in the summer with horse flies lighting up its rear end. They're not in the same spot.
I think that was the year where one of our coworkers asked you what your cover scent of choice was.
Yeah.
And you responded with Aqua Reef.
Yes, exactly. Aqua Reef by Old Spice. It smells great.
It's just like, that's when I put Rick on a pedestal. I'm like, this guy knows what he's doing. Aqua Reef.
Aqua Reef.
Studies show.
Yep.
Deer love Aqua Reef.
Yeah.
This podcast brought to you by Aqua Reef.
I wish you could have seen his face because he was just like, what?
It went blank. But so okay, that year I hunted it as an observation sit. The very next year, the exact same day, the Sunday of opening day, of opening weekend, did another observation sit. This time a little bit in a bit more of a strategic spot, low area where deer kind of enter. Again, intent only being to observe and hopefully maybe shoot a doe. And a nice buck came out.
Can you describe this low area that you're talking about?
Yeah, so
provide some context.
Yeah, okay, that's a good call. So low area, we're talking farm country here.
Mm-hmm.
So not a whole lot of elevation change.
Sure.
When I say low area, it's probably 20 feet lower than the highest point on the field, but it is the lowest point.
Yep.
And
that's a cover thing, do you think?
I actually think it's a thermal thing.
Oh, sure.
I think
because scent's going to ride down.
It's a bit of a cover thing, but I think it's also a thermal thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That day, I had seen a handful of deer, handful of does, and a lot of the does were just, moving through the field willy-nilly. I was actually watching those does when all of a sudden I kind of looked back to my right, and in this swale, this low area, the absolute lowest point on it, he was just there was a buck just standing there, and if I had to guess, if I had to put myself in the mindset of that buck, he was just letting those thermals sink because there were a couple things. It was a hot, humid day.
Wow.
If you picture like the end of summer where you get it starts cooling off at the end of the day, where are the first places that you start to see fog?
Yeah,
on the landscape. It's in the low area, and that's out. Like I have this vision in my head of that deer standing there, and like fog is kind of pooling around him. And as soon as I saw that, I'm like, he's checking the thermals.
Oh yeah, I bet he was just standing there and just kind of.
Yeah, he was not going anywhere. He wasn't feeding yet. He was literally just standing there, letting those thermals pool up.
Just surveying the situation.
Yep. He stood there for probably 15 minutes before he finally started making a slow ways, working his way out of it, and ended up shooting that deer right in the waning hours of legal shooting time. And but anyways, to bring this full circle to how to hunt some of those, like those are examples of how to hunt it when there's a little bit of luck involved, and it's also going to pay off on the first day.
Yep.
Last year, I didn't really run into that situation, but I was still seeing a lot of deer in this spot. How I ultimately ended up shooting that doe that we're talking about here, and I saw a couple decent bucks that night as well, was like 2 climbing sticks high in a black walnut tree that's maybe 6-8 inches in diameter. And I've hunted out of tree stands. I've hunted out of saddles. I was hunting out of a saddle in that case, and I actually left my backpack, my platform, and as much stuff as I could on the ground.
So you were standing on a step.
I was straddling a little limb.
Oh man.
Of that tree.
Yeah.
Because it was really the only way. And it was because I was so low too. I had to stay under branches if I wanted to be able to shoot out into that field. If I went any higher, I would have had branches all over the place, and it would have been, kind of a cluster. But if you picture a lot of big, mature oaks that were raining acorns, that leads up into this alfalfa field. And then again, this is just that brushy transition swale, and that's where all the deer were kind of coming out of. It just so happened to work out where the scent was where the prevailing wind would have been blowing my scent almost exactly at the deer. So I figured they were going to be in there, but there was just enough north in that to kind of blow it back where I thought they were. Again, I had hunted it 4 or 5 times. I knew exactly where they were coming out.
Yep.
So I had a projected bedding spot, like really nailed. And I knew that I could just skirt the edge of that wind with that bedding spot. And I probably saw 20 deer that night, shot a doe that came literally right up the pipe, saw a couple, younger bucks, and that was, I guess, my strategy for that sit.
It's crazy when you do get on that razor's edge of wind, because whenever that happens to me, which generally I'm on the other side of the edge of the wind, but you're like, I can't believe I'm getting away with this. But you are. But you're just right. I mean, you're just right on that line.
Yep, exactly. I think that's something, too. I mean, we talked about, or we haven't talked about trail cameras yet. I go back and forth with cameras. This year I actually have a fair amount out. But it's not something that I'm, like, using actively to plan my, hunts for, like, the here and now. I'm more collecting data for... like this conversation we're having right now, right? It's like I can look at a picture that I have of a buck and then type in the date on Wonderground and like look up historical weather, figure out where that deer was. Like, let's say he's oriented left to right. I get a 3 photo sequence of him kind of just moving. Well, I understand obviously the way that my camera is oriented, and then you just type in that date into Wonderground. You can look up the historical weather and figure out, okay, what was the wind direction, what were the conditions, and why was that deer there? It all goes back to like why was he doing what he was doing?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, this is just my this is a lot of folks have talked about this, but I think a lot of times those deer like to move with a crosswind, because they can keep that to their advantage a lot of times.
Yeah.
So,
and you can do that same thing with deer that you just saw.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, okay, I saw a buck today. Like, why? And like obviously you can, because you saw it and you saw where he came from, you can deduce a lot of things. But then you can also go and be like, well, I don't know exactly what the weather's doing today. Like,
exactly.
What is the what's going on there.
Exactly. So. Yeah. So, I mean, it all just kind of goes back to trying to figure out, like, what are the conditions? Why was he there? And then applying that to the broader spectrum. And just because it happened in this very specific area doesn't mean that situation doesn't apply to other areas.
Mm-hmm. I think with that weather checking too, Eric, one thing that I've noticed, like I'll check the weather and I'm like, oh, this spot should be good. Like I hunt a lot of spots that I've never been into because I don't scout as much as I should. But I'm like, okay, so the wind is out of X direction. So I'm looking at the map. So, yep, I should be good because of X, Y, Z. I think I'm going to get to this spot. And then I'm like, the wind is not out of this direction, But you can also like cross-ref what the wind is actually doing with what the weather whatever is saying, like,
wind scouting.
You're like, okay, so all the airports, I think that's where they draw a lot of weather from. So like, they're telling me that, when they collect all their data, the wind is coming out of here. But actually what's happening over here is not the case. But I know when all the weather stations are saying that it's coming out of this, it'll actually be doing this. So you can kind of like still use that, as like a predictor, and that's more of like an after you've been into a spot thing.
Yep, exactly.
Also, I find, and I've mentioned this before, like, oh, the wind's out of the west or whatever. And when I get in the tree, it's out of the west, and then it's out of the east, then it's out of the south, then it's out of the north. So, I don't know.
Yeah, the wind, I have seen that as well.
The wind is a fickle bee.
It is very fickle.
Any other farm country stuff? Any hot farm country tips?
Oh, man. I mean, I think the big thing is paying attention to that crop status. Yeah. I really like when they're up. Whether it's corn or soybeans, I like when the crops are in. I know, and I think the reason I like it that way is what helps me as someone that's hunting public. More like as soon as those crops are out, right? Like if you're hunting a private property, you naturally want those crops out because you got kind of a feeding area set up. It's less bedding cover, all that stuff. But for the way that I hunt more like driven towards like where are they hanging out during daylight hours? What is the most irritating place to get to from a hunter's standpoint? It's going to be when if you tell someone, hey, you got to walk through a standing cornfield or a standing bean field, and you got to walk through all the multiflora rows, all the raspberry bushes, and all this stuff just to get to this spot where you might see a deer, not many people are going to do that. You know, as soon as the crops come out, you've got a paved way of like, you know, places where people can walk through very easily, get to these different spots, and then it's a total shift on where they're going to be bedding.
Gotcha.
So,
gotcha. I like that. What about river bottom stuff? I really like river bottoms.
I do too. So the last couple of years, there's a kind of a distinction, I guess, between like Western river bottoms and Midwestern river bottoms.
Yeah.
Midwestern river bottoms oftentimes are a little bit more flat.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have typically, like if you think about rivers in the West, you might have big breaky country that kind of drops down into it. And a lot of times that does really crazy stuff, to your point with the wind. Like you don't know, like that's actually where your wind scouting stuff, I think, really comes into play. And in those situations, what I typically do is no matter what the wind is, I typically go in there with the mindset that the wind is going to follow the current downstream.
Okay.
No matter what the conditions are. Like a lot of times I'll find in some of the areas that I hunt out west, you might have like a south wind, and let's just say the river's going north to south. Well, that south wind might apply to like up on the bluff,
right,
up on top, where the mule deer are hanging out, and where up on the flats the antelope are, you know, doing their thing. But as soon as you get down into those bottoms, it's anyone's guess, and I'm just going to put my whole strategy is going to hinge on the thermals, and assuming that it's probably going to be a little bit swirly, and hoping that like if you're dropping milkweed, it's going to follow the current of the river going downstream. So that's with the western side of stuff. More on the Midwestern side, there's a lot of different ways, I guess, to hunt that. A lot of times those are flatter. They're not as disrupted by big bluffs as they are out in the western United States. Oxbows, stuff like that are typically the areas that I key in on the most.
Describe what you mean by an oxbow.
So like you picture the river, right? And all of a sudden, let's say it's running north to south. This river runs north to south. All of a sudden it jets way to the west, tails down to the south, and then back to the east, creating almost like a loop that you would, you know, make a knot with or something if you're picturing it as like a rope.
Almost
right?
like a peninsula.
A peninsula, basically a land peninsula that would jet out into the water that is surrounded by water on three sides.
And so perpendicular to the regular flow of the river.
Yeah. Exactly. A lot of times deer will bed in those areas because they know that they're protected by the river.
Sure.
You essentially have three different directions where you can rule out somebody, you know, a predator coming from. If they do come from it, you're probably going to hear someone coming through the river. You're probably going to hear them sloshing through. You're probably going to hear coming up the cut banks, stuff like that. So they'll bed with their back to those areas, looking out into the flat river bottom. The lack of topography in those river bottoms is what makes them hard to hunt, because a lot of times they can just see for forever. Spent a ton of time when I lived in Iowa hunting river bottoms, and that was the biggest challenge with them. Is a lot of those river bottoms were choked with black walnut that lost their leaves very early. There was minimal cover underneath. You know, maybe it was like tall grasses or something like that, but you didn't really have a whole lot of blowdowns and high stem count type stuff. And those were always the hardest places to hunt because the deer would hang out in there, and it was like a golf course, right?
Yeah.
They could just see for forever. And then the one area that they couldn't see, well, guess what? That's the way that they have themselves positioned, so the wind is flying right over their back. So how we hunted that a lot was either by kayak or depending on the status of the river, a little pair like hip waders. Like, and I'm not saying like chest waders, because chest waders, they get bulky. You know, you definitely need them in some river situations. But if it applies to the place that you're hunting, little pair of hip waders, you know, you can wear those in. You're not going to get as sweated up as you would if you're wearing something that's like a chest weight or whatever. And then once you're in, you're not bringing boots with you. So you just slide those hip waders down around your ankles, and now it's essentially a pair of rubber boots.
Sure.
So more breathability, a little bit more versatile. You don't have to hike in with your, boots on your back or whatever. It's one less thing that you got to worry about.
Yeah.
But a lot of times we'd work those river bottoms until you find crossings. You're probably scouting that stuff a lot during the mid part of the season, and looking for rubs or anything like any of that hot sign, and then setting up on the areas where you're most suspecting a deer to bed, using the river to your advantage from like an access standpoint to slip in kind of undetected.
Are you, and maybe just the answer is it depends, but like sometimes just like boom, popping up out, like basically like zero impact, like hunting like not that far from where you're
absolutely
accessed?
The best. I mean, this was actually on a private piece that I hunted when I lived in Iowa, but the best spot I've ever hunted was a river that flowed east to west.
Mm-hmm.
We had permission to hunt everything to the south and to the east of this like little 40-acre chunk, and we would access it from the west. It was a hard place to access if you did anything other than hunted it from the river, because you would walk into it essentially on this super flat landscape. Everything would see you. And you'd be walking into the area that you're hunting only to turn around and then look back the way that you came, just because that was the access that we had set up from the road.
Right.
So we had permission from the neighboring landowner to just, either walk or kayak, canoe. Actually, first time we brought a canoe in there, we had it strapped to my old GMC.
Yeah.
First time I ever drove with a canoe, and it flew out of the canoe on the interstate.
No.
That was the day I learned how to pack a canoe. But anyways, so we had permission to access through the creek, and basically what we would do is on any like westerly south, if there was a little bit of south in it, that was ideal because deer could work that river bottom with the wind in their face. But we knew that our wind was literally blowing right over the river, which was right behind us. And I mean, our canoe was like, our feet were maybe on the ground for 3 or 4 steps from the riverbank to the time that we were putting climbing sticks on the tree and going up. So that was an ideal setup.
I mean, you just feel like so bulletproof at that point. You're like, dude, we've done nothing to let these deer know that they're
exactly. And a lot of times those rivers it is the lowest point, right? So anything that's above you, you can sneak kind of right underneath them, unbeknownst to them.
I like it. Yeah, western rivers, like you said, a little bit different. And I'd say one thing that, in contrast to what we have around here, I'd say oftentimes water is more limited. And so that's like kind of like one of those like limited determining factors that's going to draw deer into that area.
Exactly. Yep.
What about bluff country, Eric? You ever hunt some bluff country?
Yes. So in southwest Wisconsin, we're in the driftless area. That's where I spend like 99.99% of my time. And I absolutely love it. It's the most parallel. Like, I've never elk hunted, but I would imagine that there are parallels of, the way that whitetails relate to bluff country is probably not too dissimilar from the way that elk relate to the mountains out west.
I would say, and actually you made me think of something too that I was thinking of earlier. A couple years ago, you're talking about, where deer were bedding and, river bottom, creek bottom on those Oxbow Peninsula things. We got on some elk that were doing the same thing. And I was like, gosh, they just, on some level, all these things kind of like the same stuff.
Absolutely. And so when it comes to the bluff country type stuff, I like it for a couple of reasons. One, it's, anytime that you do this, So like up, down, you just left half the people that are hunting that area behind you.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the folks hunting public land are they don't want to go up just to go down to go back up. So from an access standpoint, that's something that I'm always kind of like thinking about. It's not something that I'm like actively trying to do, but I do know that like, okay, if I do need to get to the second or third ridge in, you know, and that makes the most sense for the setup, odds are most times no one's going to be back there.
Sure.
Thermals, you just have a lot more considerations when it comes to thermals. But with that, I think your bedding areas are a lot more defined in the bluff country than they are anywhere else. Bluff country is more rolling, gentle hills than what you're going to find out in the west of like breaks that run down into a river. A lot of times they're just covered in you know, hardwood, like oaks or, you know, any kind of vegetation that you've seen in the Midwest, trying to paint that picture for someone that might not be like totally familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times those deer are bedding at the upper third of the ridge with wind blowing over their back. That's not the end all be all, but like if I was just to say like generally where are you going to find deer, that's kind of the stuff that I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm.
The big challenges that come into play there are hunting it in a way like we just were talking about where you're still giving the deer the wind advantage. You know, like for example, you're not going to go hunt a the eastern side of a ridge with wind blowing back to the west. You know what I mean? Like that's where it gets a little bit harder. You need to be giving the deer that you're hunting that advantage with the wind by kind of playing threading the needle, so to speak.
Yeah, you're taking some chances for sure, and you're gonna get busted.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a lot of swirling that goes on because leaf on cover versus leaf off cover plays a lot into that. That also plays a lot into thermals. And just, you know, prevailing wind directions fluctuate a lot more when you've got more terrain on the landscape.
How is that playing into the thermals?
The
leaf cover.
So when you have that leaf cover on, especially, and sometimes you never lose it. Like if you're hunting like a cedar patch or something like that thermal cover is there all the time. Basically, that's a trap that's going to keep that heat layer of, you know, when it warms up during the day, keep that kind of trapped. So late season, that's going to be something that you're really considering. Whereas in the early season, you know, maybe you're not as hyper focused on that. Maybe you're actually looking for stuff that doesn't trap the thermals really well. So on hot days, you can kind of get into areas that are a little bit cooler.
Gotcha.
So the big thing, though, when it comes to bluff country is access and figuring out creative ways to kind of get underneath deer or get past deer to get to the areas that you want to hunt without blowing everything out.
Yeah.
So
easier said than done.
Some of the stuff that I think has worked well for me is, you know, we talked about scouting. You know, if it is something that you have the ability to do beforehand, you know, I'll just record I'll like treat the scouting mission as it was going to be a hunt, right? So I'll try to walk the exact way that I'd want to get to that tree, and then record that on my map, knowing that, okay, this is an appropriate way to get in here.
Sure.
And then that gives you a little bit of a guiding light. There's not going to be trails. There's not going to be stuff that you would follow like you might find in farmland or, you know, other types of habitat types. But it does, I think, open up a whole lot more opportunity for you to get creative with your access.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and I'd say like oftentimes what I see is like, you know, deer move like water, man. Path of least resistance. You know, they don't want to go. You know, I mean, you'll find them anywhere, right? But
their mindset's still conservation of energy, though, and
right.
They're not gonna, you know, on a daily basis go out of their way to exert energy they don't need to.
Yeah. So I mean, it's generally like fairly obvious where they're going to travel to, I feel.
Yeah, and I think, you know, if your goal is to shoot a buck, like if that's kind of like the way that you're approaching this, I mean, this is more of a rut thing, pre-rut thing, but you'll find a lot of times in bluff country, you'll have a trail that kind of follows that third of the ridge, and it probably goes around the whole thing.
Yep.
And oftentimes that's like, to your point, Ryan, like that is the path of least resistance. They don't want to necessarily walk in the wide open of the top of the ridge. They still want a little bit of security cover at their back, and a lot of times that's going to be the bulk of your deer traffic. A lot of does, fawns, young bucks using those trails on that upper third. What I think, if you find a convergence of those trails, a pretty decent tactic is setting up in a way where you'd be observing any buck that's just going perpendicular to that stuff, because the buck's mission at that time of year is just to cover ground and get as much of a snapshot of from a scent standpoint of what has been in the area, and the best way to do it is just by cross-referencing that stuff. Mm-hmm. So that's something that I do a lot, when it comes to late October, early November. In a couple of years, that's worked out where, just in the middle of the day, 2017, I shot a buck that was doing exactly this. It rained all night. I slept in that day, because it was just pouring rain. Went in there and went into the spot as the rain was starting to let up, and there were just scrapes everywhere. You've ripped up. Like, you knew it just kind of had that feel that, okay, there's probably a good buck in here. And got up on this ridge top, and, this was a situation where there were a ton of those different trails that were, running parallel to the ridge. Mm-hmm. And I found a convergence of it, and I just sat on that, and I had multiple different bucks come and just parallel those trails all day long. You could see them kind of like off in the distance, and then the deer that I ended up shooting just, kind of, there was obviously a lot of luck involved there, but like looking back on it, this wasn't my intent at the time, but I was set up more on the point of that ridge. Mm-hmm. And I think that buck was probably bedded on that point. So the fact that he crossed, came perpendicular to those trails first wasn't a coincidence. It was just the trails that were closest to him where he was bedding, and he was using those as like, that's the first place that I'm going to check. He knows that anything that has worked that ridge system has probably come to that point. So it was just closest in proximity to his bedding location. That's where he went, and I just happened to be there. It wasn't something that I was like thinking about in the moment when I hunted that area and hung the stand. But after I shot that deer, it was kind of like just running through like, okay, what worked? And I think it was proximity to where the deer was bedded and the terrain type and what he was doing.
It's funny how, throughout the years, you get lucky, you kill a deer, and then, only, very far down the road, you figure out why you killed that
exactly.
deer.
in the moment, I remember just saying, oh, he was cruising for does. But I think there was a lot more intentionality in what he was doing than what I gave him credit for in the moment.
Yeah, that's cool, man. What about we talk a lot about hunting public land, but how does private land play into your public strategy, Erik?
So, a lot of times by just driving the area, physically just covering, putting miles behind windshield time, trying to figure out okay, what is the situation on these different properties? You can do a lot by map scouting too. If you're seeing properties that have big ground blinds up and stuff like that, well, odds are that guy is a hunter and is setting up his property for, deer hunting. Going to give you kind of an idea that, this guy's probably, got got a good situation going. So I'm going to riff off this a little bit.
Sure.
But,
kind of hunt the fringes.
Exactly. I think the on the flip side, though, the more, obviously, you can't just go, blazing a trail across private land or you'd be trespassing. So the more that you have property boundaries that are jagged rather than just flatline squares, you're going to rule people out getting into that stuff because it creates a little bit more of a navigation problem than it is if it's just, this wide open big chunk of land. So I think a lot of times people will overlook the small properties that might be tucked away in between, some chunks of private and just write them off as, that place is 20 acres. Even if there is someone on it, they're going to be in the spot that I want to be in. I think a couple things there, one, people don't often hunt those. They typically, you open up your map, the first thing that's going to catch your eye is the biggest thing, so you're going to see those areas that are, 5,000-6,000 acres or whatever. You're not necessarily going to be immediately drawn to that little 80-acre chunk that's got weird property boundaries and a total pain in the butt.
Yep.
So, and I know that was something that we even kind of talked about a little bit on the front end of this, was looking at the map and trying to find some of these areas. like on the go and kind of troubleshooting that access problem. That's the biggest thing when it comes to hunting, on the go. Every single hunt is an access problem that you're solving.
Yep.
It's not a find the deer problem. It's find the access that works for deer being in those locations.
Yep. Ryan, you got your map up.
Well, I do, because here's the deal, Rick. I don't have a spot.
Yep.
And the hour is upon us. We're in the 11th hour, I guess.
We are.
So I'm not going to tell anybody where this is, but I'll kind of describe it. So we talked about where we are.
May I?
Yeah, please. So this is we're in southwest Wisconsin. So we're in that kind of bluff country, interspersed with small to medium-sized agricultural plots. There's quite a bit of water feature.
Yep.
Where I'm at here. And let me tee this spot up. It's public.
Yep.
Okay. Gets a lot of pressure.
Yep.
And it's kind of hard to access and navigate, but there's a couple of spots that I've got going on here. So there's topography. There's a little bit of ag near it.
Yep.
Here's my access point, Rick.
Yep.
This is pretty much it. Where am I going for deer from here as you're looking at this?
So the big thing that I kind of look at when I'm just kind of perusing this is different terrain type, or what the topography is doing. Yeah. So there's a trail, there's a main access trail, and there's a lot of variances in topography and also habitat cover. Yeah. You've got everything from like open grassy areas to your big hardwood stuff, with some good looking private stuff kind of located nearby it. Yeah. First thing that I kind of do is like I look at a main trail, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to avoid that because a couple things. One, you've got your non-consumptive users, people that just want to go out on a hike. Sure. And then you've also got anyone that wants to get way back into this stuff is probably going to take that trail, and they're going to think, well, if I went a mile on the trail and then I get 50 yards off of the trail, I'm in the cookies. You are not in the proverbial cookies. In the cookies. Because a lot of other people are going to have that same mindset. Sure. Yep. So then next thing, kind of doing is thinking about prevailing winds. In Wisconsin, westerly, northwesterly, is primarily what you're going to get on your really good deer hunting days if you got a cold front or something like that. And there are areas where you would have that wind setting up pretty well on this property. So then next thing, I would do is start zooming in a little bit closer and looking more at the landscape from simply a topo standpoint and trying to find those secondary ridges that come off the main ridge. Mm-hmm. And these are going to be a lot more subtle. And I almost want to find these that's why I kicked it over to topo.
So what you're saying when you say secondary ridges, so I'm thinking let's establish a high point on the topography, right? We then have a notable downslope, and then do we have another, I'm not going to call it a plateau, but a flattening
exactly
of topography, and then another fall off.
Basically, we talked about this a little bit on a different podcast that we did with Aaron Warbritton. Mm-hmm. The best way to picture secondary ridges is take your hand, put it on the table, and you've got all your fingers out, right? And your wrist to your hand is the main ridge, and all of your fingers are those secondary ridges.
Think of a step up if you're a dirt biker.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
So the reason that I kicked it over to topo,
not a dirt biker,
is I didn't want any influence of what the habitat cover looks like.
Sure. That's a really good point. And I don't do it enough.
You got to be super unbiased. Yeah. With a lot of this stuff because you might find it 50 yards from the truck, you might find it 2 miles in.
So you're
it
talking.
Helps you see. It almost. When you want to analyze that component of just the topography, it gets away from the clutter. It takes away that bias.
Exactly.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So get rid of the veg that you would look at from space.
Yep.
And be like, oh, I have timber, I have crop, I have grass, I have what? Just screw that and go right into topo.
Exactly. Okay. Because what I'm going to try to do there is I'm going to try to find a topo feature in bluff country that checks some of the boxes, prevailing wind, and any of those secondary ridges are going to be separated by a ditch. Mm-hmm. when a buck, whatever, is bedded on one of those secondary ridges and he's on the top of it, he has sight advantage over those corresponding ditches, right? So that's what I'm looking for. And they're very, very subtle a lot of the times. Like, honestly, most times they're not even able to be picked up on the map. Sometimes you do just got to spot check the place to find it. But I mean, looking at this, there are a couple of them. So like right here, there's one. And what I like about this as a whole is, let's assume that there's a northwesterly wind. A deer can be bedded off this point. He's got relatively flatter country below him, where the terrain gets a lot more gentle, and he can bed in the top third of that, overlooking that with the wind coming over him. Also, to the north, there is a access trail. Well, if a deer's bedded in that spot, he's going to be, and that wind is strong enough. A lot of times you'll get that like wind coming over a thing, and then it kind of like tumbles.
Yeah.
And it almost creates that like, Dan Infalt has called it like a thermal tunnel. Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what you're seeing going on in a place like this. The other thing with these secondary ridges is if, like, let's assume that, he's either going to be better on that point or one of these other ones. If you can find the point that is nearest his bedding location, but not the one that he is on specifically, it's probably going to, you got a 50-50 chance. He's not going to just walk straight up on top of the flat ridge in daylight. Like, odds are it's just not going to happen. So when he does get up, he's probably going to spend some time browsing, kind of walking through the oak flats, picking up acorns, munching on them, and he might go only 150 yards in daylight before it's too dark to shoot. So if you're on a secondary ridge that, like, let's just say, you're bedded here, or your stand location is here, buck is bedded on that other point, and you were able to access that and get kind of close to him, you've got a 50-50 chance that he either went your way or the opposite direction once he got out of his bedding location. And if you can set the wind up to your advantage, that just is a little bit more reason for him to want to come your way versus go the opposite way. So let's say here there's a deer bedded on this point. I really like the way that this looks. If you can somehow get into this, odds are he's not going to want to go straight back towards the road, towards like where other people are. Once he gets up, he might want to work his way with a northerly wind, work his way to the east, munching on acorns before. Let's see if that's... So now I'm kicking it to like a hybrid mode, right? That shows your terrain plus your leaf cover, your satellite imagery, all that stuff. So then when you kick that on, there is a crop field down there, which would be a destination for him to get to, not in daylight, but at some point after dark, he's probably going to head down there to feed for the evening. So that's a super subtle feature right there. Also, this that kind of comes off that point, there's another little like knob. Essentially, that would give me a point of interest that I'd want to go at least confirm and see what that looks like, because to access that, what I would try to do is hug the south boundary and slip in there either early in the morning or again, pro for hunting early, not waiting for the rut, is you've got leaf cover. So if a deer is bedded in this,
he might not see
you.
Yeah.
As soon as you're waiting, I'm waiting for November 7th. Well, now all those oak leaves are down, and
your access is blown.
Exactly. Like, he's going to see you when you're here, and then he's going to go up and over, and you're not going to get on him.
He'll blow your cover.
Exactly. So that's what I like about that. I also really like, assuming that there maybe are some acorns in there. That would be another thing that I'd be doing from like an in-season scouting standpoint, is get in there, see what the acorn crop looks like. From what I've seen here, it's, like I said, September 15th. I've been seeing a ton of acorns, but like, let's say you go, which is great, right? There's acorns all over the place. The bad part is there's acorns all over the place, and no matter where the deer are, they've got, you know, a nice little sweet treat for them. But, you know, let's say you went in and scouted this, you know, worked your way in this Saturday, opening day, and kind of looked for, let's say you do find an isolated white oak. That would be like my like crown jewel, right? And then I would want to get in an area that is shootable to that, or cutting off movement that would get to that. And essentially, you know, get in a position where your prevailing wind is going to set up where the deer want to get there. It works for them to do that. So for them to reach that destination, the wind needs to be blowing in their face. So however I need to position myself, you know, whether that's, you know, 50 yards upwind of it with my wind kind of blowing back to the tree, but just off so that when they do come past, they're not
running into that scent cone.
Exactly. Yeah. That's how I would, I guess, attack that situation. And then zooming out, you know, there's other stuff. There is a lot of different terrain and a lot of different features on this, but that's the one that kind of jumps out. I also like that it's a little bit obscure, that this whole area here, which you have pins in this area as well. But I like that it's a little obscure in the form of like, you've got anything that wants to kind of cut a corner and stay in like tree cover. It's a little bit closer here than if it wants to do that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Eric, when you were talking about, like, you know, you got a buck, maybe or you think a buck is potentially bedded on, you know, one of those points, and you're setting up, I guess, kind of like on a similar terrain feature, but just adjacent to the one that you think he might be coming from.
Exactly.
Are you setting up on kind of the same topo line that you think he's going to be on too?
Yep.
So it's like kind of like he's not like going necessarily up or down. He's just traversing the hill on your level.
Yeah, I want to get level with him. Absolutely. Okay. And again, to use that analogy of the hand on the table, right, with your fingers splayed out, I'm not going to walk up the spine of that secondary ridge. Like, I'm going to be in the ditch. You know, it's going to be much thicker, a lot, you know, you're going to be making noise, but that's the other thing about being in that ditch. Especially early in the year, your sound is even a little bit more trapped in there.
Sure.
So, like, if you would think about that from, like, let's say you're rifle hunting mule deer out west, and you wanted to get up within 300 yards of a buck that you saw, you'd probably take a similar access route in that bottom to then pop over and get level with them 300 yards from his bedded position, and then that's where your shot happens. Essentially, that's where your hunt starts in this. Gotcha. In this realm, right? Yeah. Like, you're trying to get up level with him within that 3, you know, to 150 yard, I guess, buffer, depending on what you're, you know, what is the draw? Like, what is the food source? What is the draw? Like, how good is it? What are the conditions that day? Is it like a 5 out of 10? Is it a 10 out of 10? On a 10 out of 10, he's probably a little bit more apt to, you know, travel a little bit further in daylight. But if it's a day where it's like, you know, not necessarily ideal, you probably got to be a little bit closer. Mm-hmm. So, those are a lot of the considerations that, like, I'm thinking about in that situation.
So I have a question that I think a lot of people who are, and myself included, listening want to know. Like, we talk about thermals, we talk about secondary ridges, and we talk about using topography to our advantage. Thermals are different in the morning than they are in the evening, generally. So let's just say we've identified this piece that has a secondary ridge. We talked about the food. We talked about the cover. How do you access it in the morning versus how do you access it in the evening? How do you get out of it in the morning? How do you get out of it in the evening?
Yep.
Knowing what we know about thermals. And let's just say that buck is absolutely on that secondary ridge.
Yeah. So it becomes a lot. Your when you strike, I guess, becomes a whole lot more magnified in that situation. You're like, hey, I know, like, let's say you got a cell cam on that and you know that he's there.
Let's back up a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's say I don't have a spot.
Yep.
I haven't been able to go in and pre-scout. I haven't been able to hang a camera. Like, I don't have a spot. I've shown you this one.
Yep.
I can only hunt it in the evening because I cannot miss work in the morning.
So go ahead.
How are you getting in? How are you getting out?
So in that situation, what I'm probably doing is, let's get this map on again here. Okay, so I'm just thinking through a couple different things. Like for you to hunt that spot, you need a westerly wind.
Okay.
A westerly or a northwesterly. So coming in above that, you're going to blow your scent off of that top down to where he is.
Yep.
Coming in below him, it's a little bit more challenging because, like you said, your thermals are going to be rising and coming up.
And are we saying morning or evening right now?
Evening.
Evening.
Because you can't hunt after or before work.
Yep.
You're coming in for an after work type deal.
Yep.
So, what I'm looking at right now and what I'm trying to think about is shade. Like sun position. So the sun is going to be what actually bodes well for you in this situation is, assuming it's an evening hunt, the sun is going to be a little bit lower.
Sun will be here.
Yep. So, and that's actually something that you can play. Like that's on Google Earth. Mm-hmm. That's probably like the sunlight slider, and what is in the shadows is probably like the most underutilized tool on Google Earth.
Why?
So you can figure out where shadows are. Which in this case, like let's say I wanted to get a sun slider of where the sun position is at 5 o'clock when I'm going to be walking in. What I'm looking for there is where are the shaded areas, because that's where those thermals are going to start sucking down.
Yep.
So
Gotcha.
I'm going to use that as getting up above whatever that is, assuming that it's this little pocket right here.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to hug that edge. And that's where like you're creeping, right? You're on pins and needles at that point.
So to paint this picture for people who can't see the map, we have a secondary ridge. We've established what that looks like.
Yep.
We're in the evening. We have the right direction of wind.
Yep.
And we are coming low.
Low, exactly. Yep. And the reason that you're coming low is because you're essentially just dumping your thermals, your scent, your ground scent. You're putting it in that little thermal pool that's just starting.
Yep.
And the reason that it's just starting is because it's still early in the evening, early in the afternoon.
Sure.
So you have a little bit more concentration and more control of where your thermals are going to go than if it's a little bit later and they could just be in this wide swath.
Okay.
So I'm going to try to get up above that, dump all of my ground scent, whatever, in that area.
And by up above, you mean above the low point, but below the deer.
Below the deer.
Bingo.
And then find that next to ridge that he's on. So let's say he's bedded on one of those secondaries. I'm going to try to get on the secondary that is to the east of him, assuming that you got the right conditions, right?
Because we have a northwest or west wind. It's blowing toward me at that point.
Toward you, absolutely. And assuming that he's going to wind up in that destination field at some point, and then you're coming up. That's you're coming up that ditch with cover between you and the deer's projected bedding area.
Sure.
You're going to crest up on top of that. You've probably got a rough area in mind where you're going to be. At that point, it's find the tree, get up the tree in a very, very, very quiet way, because that deer's probably going to be pretty close to you. And then it's wait them out.
Yep.
Once it's time to get out of there, you're not going to go back the same way that you came.
Right.
Because, again, those thermals are kind of pulling down. He's probably going down, assuming he's going to that crop field. So at that point, it becomes a game of quietly getting up above him and allowing buffer for your wind to not just be drifting right into that. So in this case, obviously, the point of least resistance to get back to the truck quickest would be cut across this little grassy, pasture up on top and get to the trail and then hike the trail down. But what I would likely do is hug this to the east, come all the way up there, get on this trail where people have probably been walking already that evening.
Right.
And then now at this point, I'm no different than the guy that walked the dog down there 2 hours earlier.
Yep.
I'm going to walk that back to the truck, and even if he is picking that up, which he's probably not at that point, that's a pretty good distance away.
Yeah.
But then you're blending into everyone else.
Yeah. Nothing he doesn't see, all summer long.
Exactly. So that would be my game plan for that. And that's definitely dependent on time of year, leaf cover, that kind of thing. As soon as you take that leaf cover off, it becomes a little bit more challenging. And then I'm watching weather a little bit more. Like I would actually really like to get in there on like a rainy day, not like a full on rainstorm, but a little bit of like a a drizzle on like maybe the front end of a cold front.
Yep.
And just take it really, really slow. And that's a situation where, if you have a really good idea where this deer is bedding, you're probably using your glass a lot getting in there. That's something that I think is pretty underutilized.
Yep.
Think about how many times you've bumped a deer on your way into a spot. Well, if you bumped that deer, you got inside 50, 100 yards.
Yeah.
You certainly would have. If you're really being methodical and being slow and glassing, you probably would have picked that deer up.
Turned him up.
Exactly. And in that point, then it becomes a totally different hunt.
Sure.
One, you could jump up in a tree right away if that's kind of your style. And if you're confident in it, you could try to hunt them on the ground, which gives you a little bit more flexibility, from calling standpoint.
Yep.
From a, knowing that, okay, he's probably going low to this field or whatever. Let's say that's a cut cornfield then, and it's early November. Well, I would put anything on the fact that he's probably going to be in that after dark.
Yeah.
So, again, then I would actually be trying to get below him. And assuming that he's just going to, now we're talking rut time frame, he's probably just going to come right off that hill. He's not necessarily getting up out of his bed, going to hit the acorns underneath this tree, whatever. Like, he's got a little bit more of a purpose. And if he's laying down right now, he's resting. As soon as he's on his feet, he's looking. Those are the things that he's probably looking for. He's not really worried about, munching on the acorns under the tree and getting a sweet treat. Like, they kind of have two purposes at that time of the year.
Sure.
And at that point, what I would probably try to do, let's say you did glass him up, I would drop terrain, get on his ridge, stay underneath him, because when you're underneath him in that setting, you're going to be able to kind of come up underneath and get a little bit closer to him than if you were to come down over top.
Sure.
Over top, you're going to have thermals blowing down. You're going to have the wind going down, which, that creates its own challenges in and of itself. So.
Yeah. Yeah, you bring up, glassing and I think 2 or 3 seasons ago, I hunted opening day here. And, I mean, it's a tricky spot. It's a good spot, but it's tricky to access. And honestly, the access isn't the best, but I consistently see deer when I get in there. And I'd come over the top of a ridge, and I was going down the backside, and this was, like the opening day, so tons of leaf cover, right? But I was just going slow, glass, and I throw my binos up, and I'm watching, and I just catch a flicker of brown. I'm like, that was fur, like a little flicker of fur, and then I just hold it on that spot, and then pretty soon, like, son of a bee, sting. There's a nice buck, like 3-year-old buck, and he's working a limb, and all I could see was, at that point, it's just like his head and his horns working that limb, and I didn't feel like I had there really wasn't a viable way that I was going to make a move on that deer, but, and I didn't kill that deer, but I was able to be like, okay, now I've been going slow, it's paid off that I'm going slow, it's paid off that I was glassing, I've spotted a buck, I was able to slip up, probably, I bet, 20, 30 yards closer. So the deer was probably at the end of the day, only 80 yards away. Yeah. And got in a tree, and he was still there when I got up in the tree and I got set. He didn't come my way, but it was just one of those situations where had I just been I'm going to walk in here and set up, I'm not seeing that deer.
Did you call it that deer? Opening day, early September, not historically the most call-friendly time, but did you have a grunt call on you and give him one?
You know what? I probably did, because I always do, because it's just part of my routine, I guess. I don't think I grunted at him, and I actually really wish I would have now that you brought it up.
I would be, if he was raking a tree and that's one of the things that you saw that kind of gave away his position, he just gave you a clue, a personality clue. Hey, I'm a little bit more fired up today. Yeah. So you hit him with a little contact grunt or something like that, and I think, how he reacts.
Curiosity, at least.
But it would. I'd be curious what he would do.
Yeah, that's actually. I'm gonna bring that in my bag of tricks the next time I go, and now I'm really regretting it, Eric, because I saw up from where I set up after I saw that deer, I had a 2-point working, what I call a 2-point, forked buck working a limb above me, and that same deer came by, and he grunted as he went by. The 2-point did.
That was September.
It was, opening day here. Yeah. So, and I always found, that was definitely, I can't say, I don't hunt super early that often because I'm
Yeah.
generally doing other things.
Right.
Or I shouldn't say I don't hunt whitetails early that often. Like I try to get out opening day because it's kind of like
Yeah.
I don't know.
Nostalgia.
Yeah, you get out opening
Shake
day.
the
you know.
cobwebs off.
Yeah, you always forget something. Like it's that nice drive, and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot this, that. Hopefully it's not your release or something like that.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was an instance where glassing and going slow really worked, and I think I guess where I was actually trying to go with that is like you think like, oh, there's tons of leaf cover, like I can't see jack squat. Why am I glassing? And I'd say you're glassing because there's tons of leaf cover and you can't see jack squat.
Right. It's funny though. We're fools to think that like deer aren't vocal communicators outside of the rut window. So
Sure.
right. Why wouldn't they vocalize
Right.
to each other at some other time other than rut?
Yeah.
Oh,
Absolutely.
I only talk
Yeah.
during these, whatever.
Critical 2 weeks. of
Yeah.
their-
Yeah.
One thing I think about as I've gotten more into hunting the style of that you do quite a bit, Eric, is gear.
Yeah.
And I feel like, hunting this way, potentially going, further, deeper, not always though. And I think we'll get there. We're going over time, but I don't know. This is a great conversation. I'm having a good time. Hopefully you guys are having a good time. I'm having a great time.
I'm going to shoot a spike buck and I'm going to dedicate it to Eric.
But my gear that I carry with me for like if I was hunting even elk or deer out west or whatever, it's the same stuff that I use when I'm hunting whitetails in Wisconsin, like nearly identical, I'd say, other than the fact that like, I might not be planning on spending the night, but like my gear to hunt the day, I guess, and some sort of tree stand type apparatus, whether that's a saddle or a small stand or something like that. Yeah. It's the same. Like I'm going in, I know I'm going further. I know I need the things that I need to live for a day. I know I need enough food for at least a day. And I know I need to get a buck out of the woods, hopefully, right? Or at least have the ability. And I'm not interested in making extra trips either.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's definitely something I think about too. It's like the same pack that I would use, for, like you said, for like an elk hunt or something out west is likely what's on my back.
Yep.
Just maybe adjust it a little bit. Like maybe I've got a pocket in a different place or some of the things that I'm bringing are a little bit different. But for the lion's share of it, it is the exact same stuff.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And from a clothing aspect or apparel, like I wear, depending on whatever, like temperature, weather appropriate, right? I just maybe have a phobia of just like getting wet and hypothermia, but I always have rain gear with me. And actually, because one of those reasons is because I got caught in a nasty snow storm and got lost while hunting whitetails on a day that started out bluebird, and so I dressed for bluebird weather, which it turned out to not be. Yeah, like I'm just like I'm dressed in those same clothes too because you might be hiking further. You need layering systems. Ryan, we talk about the puffy jacket all the time. Puffy jacket, puffy vest.
Don't dismiss it, folks.
Yep.
Don't do what I do.
I feel like a lot of like
zip off long johns.
Zip off long johns. There's another super nice one. But I feel like a lot of whitetail oriented clothing is not geared towards
whitetail hunting in this method.
Whitetail hunting in this method.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Like, I'm not going in with the big bibs.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
Like I said, it's the same, just weather dependent. It's the same stuff. It's like I might at least be going in on what I'd wear on like a hot September elk hunt.
Yeah.
But I'm going to bring stuff if it gets cold.
And actually, one thing that I did adjust in my like whitetail kit in the last year was I would always have like whitetail boots. That was one thing that I always had, and a lot of times I wore my lacrosse like a rubber boot, and I love those. Like they work in a lot of situations. But what I found is like as it got later in the year, got colder, I'm like I still need this insulation, but I'm wearing a rubber boot, my feet get sweaty, and I'm in something that doesn't breathe as good as like a full grain leather. So what I started doing was using the exact same boot, but the uninsulated leather boots that I'd wear chasing, muleys on opening weekend in, South Dakota. I would now wear those hunting the rut on November 7th when it's 30 degrees out. And what I'm doing is the only thing that I added was those little like puffy boot covers. The Arctic Shield ones, you can pick them up at like, Fleet Farm or whatever. Amazon has them. Like I think I actually bought them off Amazon for $39. If you're hunting on a saddle, you're going to kind of wear out the bottoms of them, and they'll get a little bit ripped up because that's your biggest contact point. And you're kind of like on the edge. But a little bit of electric tape on there, and you're going to, remedy all that.
Well, and I know things that have made me leave the woods, and well, actually, that's probably the thing that makes me leave the woods whenever, and it's getting cold, and it's cold hands, cold feet, and then of course, if you have cold hands and cold feet, you probably have a cold core too, and sometimes you just got to take a break, you know, take a break, regroup, warm up, head out for that evening hunt, but you're going to last a heck of a lot longer if you take, that into consideration.
Absolutely.
And they don't weigh that much either.
No, they don't.
They weigh nothing.
Yeah, for sure.
I like it. That's a good one.
Mm-hmm. A lot of the stuff is going to have parallels, though, from what you're,
Yeah.
Essentially, if you build a good hunting kit that can do, everything, it's going to hit the foundations of whitetail hunting, of hunting the West. And then, too,
and it's probably not going to be cheap.
Well, I mean, it's not going to be cheap, but it's also going to do more things than if you have your whitetail specific this, you're this specific that. You're buy stuff that is going to check multiple boxes, not just one.
Yep, 100%, 100%. I love hunting from a tree stand. I do. Like for whatever reason, most of my whitetail hunting, I've hunted from the ground in specific situations, can be super effective. I like getting in the tree, and I think I like getting it into the tree because I have the visibility.
Yep.
And also, like, a lot of the stuff that we hunt around here is pretty damn thick, and so you're almost like picking holes to shoot in, but you can only shoot into those holes like from above.
Exactly.
Right? You don't want to be carrying like a giant tree stand.
Nope.
With you. Eric, you brought up saddles and like more traditional like lock-ons, but and again, some of the stuff comes with a price tag, but it also allows you to get into these spots that you just like otherwise you'd be like, that's too big of a pain in the ass. I'm not lugging this thing back there.
Basically, you have a smaller footprint with that than you would with something that's going to take up more real estate on the tree. Mm-hmm. So that's why I like saddles. But I've for years I've hunted out of like just a regular mobile lock-on style tree stand, and those work great too.
Like those Lone Wolf Custom Gear, they're making some super petite lock-ons, so
exactly. And just because it doesn't weigh, 8 pounds doesn't mean that it's not useful. Like in that story that we kind of talked about at the very, very beginning of like that Summit Climber, I still have that thing. It's
35 pounds.
Exactly. It's a 35 pound stand, Yeah, it's not the most conducive thing, but like you gotta, play with the stuff that you got or have access to, and you can do a lot of good with setup like that.
For sure. Trying to think, I'll say this. We've talked a lot about, go further, get deep, go a long ways. Doesn't have to be your only strategy.
No, not at all. I think actually a lot of, like, I'm guilty of this, drive to the spot that's way far away from your house, right? Like that's something. I think about how many, I do this all the time. I have like my spot, my areas that are like my go-tos and my core areas that I really hunt a lot. Some of those are longer distances from my house. I wonder how many deer I'm driving past. And I know that's not what you mentioned when you said like going deep.
But it's true though.
But the same thing then applies to the place once you get there. Drive an hour and a half to get to the place only to hike in 3 miles, whatever. Sometimes there's situations where the best hunting is close to the road. I actually think a lot of times that, that's something that is getting a little bit more, talked about. Mm-hmm. But I think, don't overlook the apple tree that's 20 yards off the main road.
Sure.
I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I'm going to check that out this year.
Yes.
I've known about this apple tree for like 10 years.
Yeah.
Had a decent deer trail by. I never put up a camera. I'm not a big camera guy. Like, I don't know, like, probably should be. It's probably hurting. But, that's one of those things where I wish I had a camera to be like, should I be hunting this every year? Or should I just never, burn a day on it, right? I think that's what cameras do. At least for me, mentally, even though I never use them, like that's why I want to start using them. Is like to either just rule in or rule out. I'm not like trying to find like, I want to hunt my target buck for, no. Yep. But I don't want to waste a day hunting either.
For sure.
So I like that. And I would say hunt occasionally. Super weird crummy quotation mark, crummy spots. Because they're that, nobody else goes there, and sometimes deer like to be there. And sometimes because of the nature of that spot, you are going to bust deer, but occasionally you might kill one in there too.
Yeah,
you know?
definitely. Don't overlook the like little, cryptic, weird, like you said, weird spot. Like weird spots can be the great spots.
Yep. So, and that's just experimentation, But I'd say probably my 2 biggest archery bucks have come from like spots like that.
Yeah.
Where it's just like not.
And the biggest thing I would add on to that too is like prioritize like getting out in those weird spots. Like, Ryan, we were talking about hunting after work. If you can get out for, even if it's literally like during the rut, like even if I'm leaving here at 5:00 and it's getting dark at 5:30 and I can be somewhere at 10 after 5, I'm going to do it because it takes 2 minutes to shoot the biggest buck of your life.
Sure.
Oh my gosh. Make the shirt. I love it. We covered a lot of ground.
Yep.
And just what a fitting podcast. Hopefully people got some good information out of this. I know I did. And since, some whitetail seasons are already open right now.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
I'm fired up, man.
I love it. Best time of year for sure.
I'm going to go grunt a buck in September.
Get those rattling horns out. Just wrap them in some felt.
Yep.
Right? Oh, no, that's bad intel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But cool. Well, Erik, thank you. Ryan, thank you. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, if you don't got a spot, there probably is a spot. Rick showed me on the spot I don't have, where to go. So that spoon buck I get, I'm gonna call it the Rick.
I love that.
Thanks, man.
Yep.
Don't be discouraged. People like me exist, and we can get deer too.
Are you verbally committing to bow hunting whitetails this year? Is that what's happening right now?
It's possible.
Unbelievable.
It's possible. This is also the time of year you have to remember, Mark, that folks need things done before they go on their hunts, and that's what I'm for. And so a lot of times that chews up the hours of 5 to 8 p.m.
You need to exercise some self-care and take care of Ryan.
We'll see what happens.
At least a little bit.
We'll see what happens.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Thank you guys again. This was a fun one. Hopefully everybody's as jacked up about chasing these whitetail deers as I am. If you have any more questions, give us a shout. If you have any podcast ideas, give us a shout on all the social media platforms. You can reach us basically any way modern communication exists. Until next time, shoot a big one, and we'll catch you on the next one.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
There you have it, folks. Thank you very much for listening. As usual, give this video a like if you liked it, comment something below, and give us a subscribe to the Vortex Nation podcast channel. It would mean a lot to us. Also, why don't you give us a follow over on Instagram while you're at it, at Vortex Nation Podcast. We'd love to hear from you over there, and we'll keep you updated with all kinds of cool photos and videos from our adventures that we do here. Otherwise, we will see you on the next one. Thank you again. Happy hunting and shooting, everybody. Have a good one.